Hey everybody, how's it going? Today we're going to be going over and showing you how to install the Airlift air helper springs for coil springs here on our 2018 Jeep Wrangler JK Unlimited. So why might you want to consider air helper springs here on your Jeep? Well, they actually have a few different uses, primarily for towing. So although Jeeps can tow a trailer, their suspension isn't necessarily built for that. Therefore, when you do hook up your trailer, chances are you're going to see some rear end sag or squat. Now, that sag and squat can have quite dramatic effects when we're out driving on the road. So we're obviously going to be wearing down our suspension faster, but one of the number one things that people don't necessarily realize, so obviously it looks a little funny with the rear end sitting down, but by transferring the weight back to the rear, you're taking the weight off the brakes, which is primarily at the front of the vehicle. Most of our stopping power is going to come from the front axle. So when we transfer weight from that front axle to the rear axle, we're actually greatly reducing our stopping power. So here's what our air springs look like installed. It's pretty much just an airbag that installs inside the coil here. So it's a pretty simplistic design. Now, there are all different kinds of suspension enhancements on the market. There's a few different kinds for the Jeep here in particular. There's some of them that actually replace the bump stop, which is this yellow rubber bumper we see over here. They replace it with a little bit thicker material and obviously a little bit longer as well. So they would engage sooner, therefore you'd get less squat. But there is still a threshold you have to reach the suspension before those engage. So you're going to get some sag/squat regardless when using the jounce style of suspension enhancements. So airbags, however, I do see them as being the best suspension enhancement option on the market, simply because you can actually adjust the pressure inside the airbags for any given load. Therefore, we get the perfect compromise between support and ride comfort. So our airbags here, they have a 1,000-pound capacity, which is going to be more than enough for your Jeep here. You shouldn't have to worry about maxing that out at all. In regards to the PSI range we talked about, you do need to have a minimum of 5 PSI in the system at all time, just so the bags don't deform. But don't worry, that's not going to affect your ride quality at all. And we can adjust the PSI from 5 to 35 depending on our specific application and needs for that given time. So in regards to installation, I've done these types of airbags a few different times on a few different vehicles. Sometimes they can fight you, but honestly, this is probably the easiest vehicle I've did them on. It does take a little bit of strain to get them inside the coil springs there, but definitely a lot easier than some of the other vehicles. So it is something I think you guys can do at home by yourself. And obviously with some guidance from us, we'll go ahead and walk you through this entire process step by step now. So the first step of our installation, we need to go ahead and lift our Jeep up in the air using the frame so our axle can hang freely. Now we're going to take one of our air springs here. We're going to remove this black cap here. You want to keep this nearby because we're going to be reusing it soon. And we're pretty much just going to compress this airbag here, getting out as much air as possible. So we're actually just going to fold the two ends over like that, and then reinstall the black plastic cap. Now we're ready to install it on the vehicle. So we're going to be installing the airbag inside the coil spring here. We're going to be going in through the lowermost coil, and we want to make sure that the nipple here for our airbag is going to be facing down. So we're just going to work our way, feeding the airbag inside of the coil. So once we get the air spring inside the coil here, we're going to go ahead and remove the nipple here, and then we're going to readjust it here to fit a little bit better inside. We're going to repeat this same process on the other side, and then what we're going to do next is we're going to take our airline tubing here. I went ahead and cut it in half, and you're going to take one of the little C-clamps that come in your kit here, and we're going to slide that over our airline tubing a few inches down. About like that. Now what we can do is, I'm going to take the other end of our airline tubing, I'm going to push the air spring up, and I'm going to shove it down through that hole there, and it should come out the back side of the axle like so. I'm going to pull it almost all the way through, stop about there. Now we're going to take our little coil spacer here, I'm going to feed the airline tubing through that, and I'm going to push our air spring back up. I'm going to slide that into position, with our airline tubing going through the center. Now what we need to do next is we're going to take this end of our airline tubing and we're going to place it over the barb fitting on our air spring. So if you have some soapy water solution, you can spray on there. That's going to help slide it over there. And once we get that all the way on, we're going to take a set of needle nose pliers. We're going to depress the clips on that little C-clip, and then we're going to slide it up over the barbed fitting. Just like that. Now what we can do is I'll readjust the air spring and pull it through there like that. So now we're going to take the airline tubing here and I'm going to route it to the rear of the vehicle where we're going to mount our connectors. So we're going to go ahead and do that now on both sides and we'll show you the route we took. So we've got both of our airlines routed to the rear here. We'll go ahead and show you the route that we took. Now, one thing I do want to make note of is directly coming off the airbag, you want to make sure you give yourselves a little bit of slack here because the axle is going to move up and down, so you don't want the airlines too tight. With it, basically, we just have it tied off to a couple existing wires or lines that are already on the vehicle. For the driver's side over here, we actually ran it up and over. We have the exhaust to deal with, so I'm going to route it to the driver's side. I have it tied off to some hoses up here, and then I actually came up and above the subframe here. I came over, and this is where that wire is there, or that line is. And now what you're going to do is you're going to begin routing the line for the other bag here. So again, give yourselves a little bit of slack. Tied it to this evap line here, and you can see we have both of them that come together. Now we're going to go up and over the shock tower mount, and then over on this side outside the frame. We're going to go down till we get to the bumper beam here, and then we're just going to come up and across, and you can see here we have our two airlines. Now you want to make sure that over here near the tailpipe that you get some zip ties up there to secure the airlines so they're not falling down. So before we finish up our airline connections, what we need to do is over here on the driver's side, you can see how our exhaust is pretty close to the airbag, so that could potentially cause some issues with heat giving off and possibly melting the airbag. So in order to prevent that, we're going to put up this little metal heat shield that comes in your kit here. It just simply ties onto the exhaust pipe here with the two band clamps. And then we're actually going to be bending this heat shield a little bit to conform more to the shape of the exhaust. You also want to make sure that we have a little bit of space between the back side of this plate and the actual exhaust. We want minimal touching. So now we can finish up our installation a few different ways. Now what I mean by this is we can either wire the airbags together or separately. So if we're going to be towing, then chances are we're going to wire them together, but if we're just going to compensate for off-center loads, that's when we'd wire them independently of one another. So if you're doing it combined like us, what we need to do is there's going to be a T that comes in your kit. There's going to be 3 prongs on it. We're going to attach each side of the T to the line coming from our airbag, and then the output side is going to go to the inflation valve mounted on the rear bumper here. So I'll go ahead and show you where we have our T at. So if you recall, we had both of our airline tubing ran down through this area here. We went ahead and attached those both to the T there, and then we attached the other spare piece of airline tubing we had to the top of that T and then ran it over here to where we have it mounted. Now in order to attach the airline tubing to that T there, what you want to do is you want to get some soapy water and spray down the barb. Then you want to put the C-clip over the airline tubing like we did earlier for the airbag. Give yourselves about 4 or 5 inches of airline to work with. Then you can shove the airline over the T, over the barbed fitting, and then you can re-secure the C-clip. So we're going to do that for those 3 connections, and then you're going to take the other piece of airline tubing we have. We have it ran back behind here, zip tied in a few places so it doesn't come in contact with our muffler here. We have it ran over to here. And here's what our actual inflation valve looks like. So this particular customer has a 7-way trailer connector mounted on the outside of the vehicle here. So we just drilled a hole in that bracket. You can mount it pretty much wherever you want. You can drill into this metal below here. You'll need a 5/16 hole for the inflation valve. But essentially, once we have it mounted somewhere, we can go ahead and attach the airline tubing to the back of that inflation valve. It's going to be the same process we just did with the barb fittings. And then you're going to see we have a couple different washers and jam nuts here securing it to the metal bracket. Now, I will offer this option to you guys. We do sell no drill brackets that we can use to attach it here to the bumper beam. We have ones that you could drill into the bottom, or we have some no drill ones depending on how you want to attach it. So there are some options out there. It's really just going to come down to what you're going to be using it for and where you would like everything accessible. So now that we have everything hooked up, we're going to go ahead and put some air in the system here so we can check for leaks. Now we're going to take a mix of soap and water. We're going to spray down all of our connections and look for any rapid forming bubbles. Rapid forming bubbles is going to indicate that we have a leak, so we may need to recut the line or resecure the fitting. And that's going to do it today for our look and installation of the Airlift Air Helper Springs for coil springs here on our 2018 Jeep Wrangler JK Unlimited.